That show is history. In the end, aren't we all? Welcome to That Show is History. I'm Carl Bogar. Well, this is episode 1, and I thought I would introduce myself. Obviously, you know my name, it's Carl Bogar. But here's my background. I left the Marine Corps in 1994, and I came home to Illinois. I was told by my family I should get a degree in criminal justice and become a police officer like my uncle and my aunt and some of my stepbrothers. Second day home, I was at College Lake County, enrolled in classes, and I was off. 1996, I actually got my degree in criminal justice, and I started a part-time weekend sworn position. And then after that, I found myself having a great opportunity. I actually, after leaving the Marine Corps, I saw a recruiting poster that said, "Sometimes Marines make better soldiers." See, I was up for re-enlistment at the wrong time. I wanted to make a career out of the Marine Corps, but unfortunately, President Clinton had a size scope for the Marine Corps that didn't include me because of the downsizing, so I found myself home prematurely. So I went into Army Reserves, and I was with the 1st to the 339th in an instructor unit. And the second opportunity it gave me for my second annual training was actually elongated annual training, and I got to go to West Point to teach MS 102, which is Tactics, Troop Leading Procedures, and Map Reading. There, I realized that I had the wrong degree. If anyone's ever been to West Point, they know that that place, it bleeds history. There's nothing that isn't historic there at all. So I came home and I told my girlfriend, now my wife, that I had the wrong degree and I was going to go back to school and I was going to get a degree in history. So I came here to Kenosha, Carthage, and I did my undergraduate work, graduated in 2000, and then went on and got a master's degree in military history in 2009 from Norwich University. Now, my business, Historic Military Impressions, that started in 2000 after graduating from Carthage. And at the time, I knew I had to build my business in 3 phases: to build my collection, to build my credibility, and ultimately to build my house. Today, our collection has almost 40,000 items that we use to do museum quality exhibits all over the United States for public events such as a Vietnam Wall, or we just got back from Beaver Dam where National Patriots returned an American flag to Beaver Dam that had traveled to all 48 states, that were the connected 48 states, in 110 days, and it had a very positive patriotic celebration about its return. We are also now doing exhibits for other museums. Matter of fact, if anyone's heard of the High Ground, we will be there doing our Vietnam exhibit, or at least the Vietnam exhibit will be there February, March, and April of 2020. So that's a little bit about us and me, and what is the program that you're watching. Ultimately, I love history, and I think that history is the only subject that allows us to have power over our future. That understanding the past gives us power over like situations that happen in the future. And if you don't have a better understanding of that past, to make a different decision when a like situation occurs, because history cannot repeat itself. What happens is a like thing happens, like World War I. We left, we put all the war debt on Germany, and we created the situation that caused World War II. World War II, we still stayed in Japan, we stayed in Germany, we helped rebuild those countries, and we turned those enemies into allies. Matter of fact, Japan, at the end of World War II, and even during World War II, hated us as much as Al-Qaeda does today. But over time, we made them an ally, and now their Navy considers themselves the little brother of our Navy. So it's about understanding what we did wrong in the past and trying to not repeat those mistakes in the future. But this program isn't about hard history. It will have sub-segments of that. It's also about military collecting, interviews with veterans. As you said, we travel around. We get to meet a lot of people. My son and I have met 7 Medal of Honor recipients in our travels. He likes to brag that he has Gary Wetzel's challenge coin, and I don't. And that's pretty cool for a 16-year-old who has started helping me when he was 10 to meet a lot of walking breathing history and to learn from them. Well, hopefully we'll be able to do some interviews with those people and share them with you here on this program. We also do book reviews, and because I have a background in history and have been collecting since I was 5 years old, if you have items that you don't know what they are, I invite you to send them to me, and we will share with you what they are, what the background is, and ultimately if I don't know what it is, then I'll let you know you stumped Carl, and hopefully I'll be able to figure out what it is for you, or we will have a segment on it and we will then open it up to the audience, and hopefully someone out there can educate all of us on what it is. So I'm trying to make history fun. I have a passion for it. I love it. I love military artifacts, and ultimately I hope you enjoy this program and at least give it a chance, and send us an email and tell us what you think. Again, the email for this program, or if you have an item that you need to know what it is, it's thatshow@hmihistory.com. Kenosha Military Surplus, located at 6527 39th Avenue. Open Tuesday through Friday, 9 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. Saturday, 10 till 5. Closed Sunday and Monday. Kenosha Military Surplus, striving to only have 100% authentic surplus, has been serving Kenosha for over 20 years. Welcome back, and this is what I like to call History Points. Basically, History Points is a monologue where I talk about something that happens to me that involves a present day situation and how it's related to the past. For my first History Points, I want to talk about the other day I was on Facebook, and I like joining Facebook groups to learn more, because ultimately I believe that everything in life is a learning process. The first thing you learn how to do is be born. The last thing you learn how to do is die. And right now I'm learning how to make this first episode. But on this Facebook group I wanted to join, it was a group that was there to promote, well, not necessarily promote, but to ensure that people who experienced the Holocaust, their memories are preserved for future generations, because as we know, those who lived through World War II are dying at a very large number per day. And as I clicked to join it, it asked me 3 questions, and the first question was, do you believe history should be revised? And my answer was, I am a historian. And I went on to answer the other questions, and needless to say, I never got approved for that group. Now, this topic is about the idea that history is or isn't revivable or revisable, that history is somehow an absolute set, unchangeable stone in the past. The truth of the matter is, history is perceptions. It's perceptions of people who experienced an event. Those people we call primary sources. And as a historian, I could tell you that there are many situations where all of the primary sources, all of the perceptions, the people who experienced that particular event or battle have differing opinions, and sometimes have opposing opinions. Well, then how could history be set in stone? Well, it can't. It is our perception that has passed from period to period and forward through millennia, generations, and ultimately to us here in the present. So the question then is, can history be revised? Well, I used to teach classes at UW Parkside for the continuing education program. And all of a sudden, over time, they kind of slowly stopped, and I transitioned them here where I felt that I could do a better class. But I was once accused by another historian of being a revisionist historian. And she said it like it was a dirty word. And I took it as a compliment, because I understand that history should be revised. I'll give you a case in point. I'm sure all of you out there have heard of, or at least read, the Diary of Anne Frank. Well, ultimately, the Diary of Anne Frank really should be called The Diaries of Anne Frank because there are more than one. And when the book first came out, her father chose to leave certain things out that he felt was unfavorable to their memory or her memory. And later publications, those items were put back in. Now, overall, we know that, like I said, it was the Diaries of Anne Frank. We know that in the middle of the story, there's a chunk that is missing. Now, let's say tomorrow some old person in Germany or Austria or somewhere in Europe dies. And in the process of going through their estate, they discover the missing diary. And they verify that, yes, this really is the missing Anne Frank diary. And it's proven to be historically accurate. It's proven to be tested that it is without question the missing diary. So the question then becomes, would the Anne Frank story be revised? Yes, it should be revised because ultimately it's about learning more about the past, trying to get to an absolute truth, an unobtainable grail, if you will. The more we know, the better we understand. So the question isn't, is history being revised? We should expect history to be revised. We learn new things. We discover new things. At one point, Troy was thought to be a myth, and then an average amateur archaeologist from Germany actually discovered Troy. And today, Troy is a historic fact. History was revised. So when we look at revisions in history, the question we need to ask ourselves is, why is history being revised? Are we trying to move closer to the truth of the event, an unobtainable unicorn, if you will? Or are we trying to serve some other purpose? Best case of that is the Vietnam War. Today, a lot of people think the United States military lost the Vietnam War in 1975. It's a case where history was revised for not noble purposes. The truth is that Vietnam War ended in 1973 with a peace treaty that was dictated by the United States, and our troops came home by March of '73. I knew one of those Marines that was assigned to the embassy in '75. He said that our total strength on paper was 350, but we never went above 200. He was, at the time, the first sergeant of Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines. But today, we believe that a victory has become a defeat. Why do we believe that? Well, in this case, history was revised for propaganda purposes, to meet the needs of a political outcome. In that case, history has become political, history has become propaganda. And those revisions are what we need to look at. We need to look at the primary sources, and we need to understand what primary sources are really talking about. And we need to actually chase it back down to those primary sources to better understand what really happened. When I was doing my master's degree at Norwich University, I remember one night I was sitting there listening to all of our high-degree PhD professors, many of them working for the Pentagon and had former generals. I mean, men who had accomplished, and women, who had accomplished a lot in their military careers, their careers as historian, and they were talking about a book put out by Glenn Beck and how they read the book and how it drew a opinion that was counter to what all of them at that table had believed. But Glenn Beck, like a good historic buff, cited his sources well enough that all those learned men could actually go back and look at the primary sources that he was using. And they discovered that what they had thought was true was actually not true, and over time had become changed, and the purpose and the intent had become changed. And they were dumbfounded to discover that history had been revised over time to be something that it was never meant to be. It was something counter what the truth was. And they were like, so even the most knowledgeable above us can learn something. And we should always have an open mind to what is the intent? What is the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? What is the person who is publishing this book trying to accomplish? Do their primary sources, if you read the entire item that they're talking about, actually support their conclusion? Or are they picking and choosing to try to get a predetermined conclusion supported by primary sources that are outside their contents? Well, that is my first history points. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, please give me a call, or an email I should say, at thatshow@hmihistory.com. And I'm Carl Bogar, and I'm proud to say I am a revisionist historian. Thank you.
What's new at the museum?
1st Wisconsin Cavalry mustered in on March 10th in 1862 in what city? A. Madison, B. Milwaukee, C. Kenosha, or D. Racine? Today's adventure brings us to the Kenosha Civil War Museum, where they just started a new exhibit called Hold Your Horses, which is an exhibit on the history of the 1st Wisconsin Cavalry in the U.S. Civil War. We're going to show you some highlights, and hopefully you'll decide to come check it out. The Hold Your Horses exhibit is now open to the public at the Kenosha Civil War Museum, located on the 2nd floor. This exhibit is free to the public. There are several placards located on the walls of the exhibit that give a detailed history of the 1st Wisconsin Cavalry during the American Civil War. Many artifacts on display from the 1st Wisconsin Cavalry, including this frock coat and tunic that would have been worn by a member of the cavalry. Next up, we find 2 display cases with several weapons used by the Wisconsin Cavalry during the American Civil War, including the Sharps carbine. Finally, we have a 1861 McClellan saddle that would have been used by any cavalry. The 1st Wisconsin Cavalry was organized at Camp Harvey in Kenosha between September 1st, 1861 and February 2nd, 1862. Mail call! What's this? While we were in Watertown, Wisconsin doing one of our Vietnam museum exhibits, I had a gentleman who has come to several of our exhibits over the past couple years, bringing this nut with a smile on his face, and asked me if I knew what it was. And at that very moment, I had to confess that sadly, I had no idea what it was. The item that he had brought in is commonly referred to as a Jesus nut. It gets his name because it holds the main rotor on a helicopter. In this case, the helicopter was a Vietnam Huey helicopter. And if it's lost, the entire rotor comes off, and the next person you get to meet is obviously Jesus. On this day, after 3 attempts, I had to finally congratulate him on finally stumping Carl. If there's something that you would like to know more about, whether it's an artifact or a person, please email us at thatshow@hmihistory.com. Welcome back, and welcome to our first edition of the Collector's Corner. For today's episode, I had a gentleman come in the other day, first-time shopper, and he was really into German and American World War II stuff, and he wanted to know how to identify an American World War II helmet. So for today's Collector's Corner, we're going to show you how you can identify the World War II American helmet. Now the M1 helmet, I have 2 examples in front of me with 2 liners, was first introduced to the United States Army in 1942, and there are different variants of it that go all the way to about 1985, when it was finally replaced by the Kevlar helmet. The initial M1 helmet were what they refer to as front seam, which means that this ring that goes around the front edge of the helmet that secured it and reinforced it, the seam of it was in the very front, right here. In 1944-ish, late 1944, early 1945, they moved it to the rear of the helmet. So hence the terms front seam or rear seam. Now, if you have a front seam helmet, it's golden for World War II. The first generation of helmets were also what they referred to as fixed bail. Fixed bail means where the chin strap attached to the helmet, there is a little U that's welded in place. It's fixed in place, it doesn't move. The problem with these is a lot of guys would sit on the helmets, bending these back and eventually breaking them off. So later on they had to go to swivel bails. The last consideration, if you could find them, right here on the very front of the helmet is normally a heat stamp. If that heat stamp, the number is less than 1,300, it's a World War II helmet, because we know that they did 1,300 lots by the end of the war. The first liners, what they call Holi Liners, basically they did not hold up well in wet and damp conditions, especially if you're doing amphibious landings, so they were considered like paper liners. The first ones had gray neon webbing, and then later they switched the webbing to a khaki webbing that's you'll see throughout the rest of the helmet liners of World War II for the most part. And this chin strap, a lot of people believe that this was to hold the two parts of the helmet together. Although it did serve that function, its original purpose was actually to be a second chin strap, so you could wear the shell by itself, like for parades or other duty, and that's why a lot of times you see painting on the shells, like for MP or something. But in the first generation of them, this brown little leather chin strap was not replaceable. They moved on later to what they call swivel bail helmets, which means this little piece right here swivels back and forth, so if you sat on it, it would bend it out away, making sure that the helmet it didn't lose its chin strap. When they replaced the liners, they went to basically standard liners like this, where the chin strap is now removable. Early ones, this little metal clip would be green. By the end of the war, they had become black. And the sweatband, this little leather piece on the inside, was replaceable. The earlier ones were also had little green clips on it and not black ones that came later. And as you can see, the webbing on the inside is khaki. And the ones that were made in World War II in Korea, if you look, they go in, make it to the center, and then back out, so there's a little string holding them. Later ones, like Vietnam in the 80s, they crisscross, and this little string in the middle is not there. A lot of times your nape is missing, but that is normal. So that's a little quick down and dirty on the M1 helmets. And how to distinguish, a quick distinguishation of what a World War II one should have in comparison to the other one. The last other consideration is that they were refinished. If you feel the texture of the helmet, they used cork in the paint. In 1951, when they started refinishing helmets that were World War II for Korea and started making new ones in 1951, this cork was replaced with sand. So when you rub your hand over them, they'll feel more like a sandpaper than a softer, rougher finish. They'll feel more coarse and, like I said, like sandpaper. Kenosha Military Surplus, located at 6527 39th Avenue. Open Tuesday through Friday, 9 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. Saturday, 10 till 5. Closed Sunday and Monday. Kenosha Military Surplus, striving to only have 100% authentic surplus, has been serving Kenosha for over 20 years. Final thoughts. Well, this concludes the first episode of That Show is History. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I would like to hear from you. Please send us an email with your ideas, your thoughts, comments, any ideas of things that you need to know about. You can send the email to thatshow@hmihistory.com. October 24th, we will be premiering a new exhibit called From Hiding in Plain Sight to Full Integration, A History of Women in Warfare. This exhibit will be premiered at the War Memorial in Milwaukee from 9 a.m. until 12 noon. I hope to see you there. And until our next episode, I'm Carl Bogar, founder of Historic Military Impressions, and I hope you have a great evening, and thank you for watching. That show is history. In the end, aren't we all?